way, you're adding like a few too many flavors to you know, to the basic shot.
Right.
Definitely a couple of different areas that we'll look at here. You know, the first is just generally how you're trying to play the shots. Right. Like, let's say with your current formula, yep. You know, changing clubs, one swing, that sort of idea. And then the second is going to be obviously just your contact. Yep. You know, just your ability to hit the shot the way that you want to, yep. hit your landing spot, yes. Hit it solid, what trajectory you're kind of using, that sort of thing. I would say general rule of thumb when we've got these shots around the green, and it really depends a little bit on how close we are, but general rule is the closer we are to the green, generally the more we're going to get the ball on the ground fast, yeah. And allow it to roll out, right. Obviously given like different situations. Yep. And the further back we go, generally the more we're going to carry the ball in the air. And there's definitely a crossover at some point, yep. Of where you're going to go more air time and probably more ground time, almost regardless of the situation. Yep. Yeah, so we'll kind of have a look at all that stuff as we go along. Okay. But let's just hit, let's say 2 or 3 shots to this front bin, again, just as you would normally play it, and then we'll go to that back pin. So this is your 54, is it?
Yeah, this is 54.
54, okay. Yeah. All right, let's go to that second pin now. Would you change clubs for that, or are you basically just regulating the swing? I mean, because it's a little further away.
Probably I think it's 50. Yeah.
50 degree, yeah. So the way that you set up and the way that you kind of use the face and even your swing, it's definitely designed more for a high shot. Even the closest shot that you hit, I would say, if I looked at your setup, you got the ball more on the forward side. Right. You've got your upper body a little bit more back, sort of back in this area here. So everything about how you set up is going to generally hit the ball a little bit higher. Which is kind of like what I see with your shots. Only on one shot did you come in and hit behind the ball too much. Yep. And that may happen sometimes. Yes. I'd also say in certain like lie situations, maybe when it's like heavy rough or something like that, yep. Probably going to hit more behind it unless you did something different with your setup. Yep. I'd also say from a setup standpoint, looking at this side, you do stand quite far from the ball.
Oh, okay.
For this basic shot. Okay. It just looks like a technique that's going to hit the ball up more than low. So from a control standpoint, it's not that you can't control it, but do you actually need it for like this type of shot? So let's say this is a pretty neutral setup. My right foot square, ball's, let's say roughly middle, somewhere here. And I just open up my left toe. So I still have a sense that I'm a little bit open, but when I start to do this, and it's also very easy to keep, let's say, the weight a little bit more over my left side when I do that, which we want for this shot. So let's say I start to open up my hips too much. Yep. What starts to happen to my weight? I mean, how does it look to you?
More to the right.
Almost feel it like sitting on my right glute here. Yeah, so I start to sort of sit back, and then as you have the ball forward, which you did before, that's what then could make you hit behind it too much. So I would say if you want to get open, just square everything up first. Try and get that ball, let's say, right in the middle, and then just pull the left foot back a little bit, but you still want to keep the pressure left. So we'll just say open the left foot up, but you don't have to kind of pull it back or rotate your hips so much. Yep. And that'll keep the upper center more forward for pretty much all these shots, because the maximum distance we've got here is maybe 15 meters total. Yep. And some of these you're trying to carry about 5 to like 7 and roll or not roll depending on the loft. Yeah. So distance from the ball, like if you stood back here, just to see, distance from the ball, you can say is about like 1 foot away. Like you can even just use your foot as like a measuring tool there. So about where the shaft is, you know, I'm not going to stand much more behind than that for this shot. And again, for any of these pins. Ball position can probably go back 1. All this is designed to take a little bit of loft off the club and give a bit more control. And probably the most important thing, and this relates a little bit back to full swing, and you can stand back to face on or even like stand behind the camera there, is like you tend to be a little kind of this way, meaning like your upper body's kind of tilting back too much. And really we want to get, you know, this upper center slightly in front of the lower center, meaning like slightly in front of the hips. So if I just looked at my buttons on my shirt, I'm just going to like lean them a little bit this way. So what that does is it kind of gets everything a lot more forward. And depending on what I do with the face, it's going to produce, you know, a lower ball flight, more controlled. But most importantly, you're not going to hit behind on that, because when you start to go this way too much, sometimes you can bottom out.
I thought I'm leaning more towards the left.
You can do it more. Well, whatever you're doing, you need to double down on that. The actual swing, you know, the direction of the swing and all, it's actually really good. But I can see sometimes on these, because of where you're set up, kind of this way, a little far from the ball, sometimes you're kind of like chasing it a little bit to actually get the contact. It's like you're almost got to go a little bit this way.
Right.
Yeah, it's, and again, if the goal of this shot is generally to hit a lower, more controlled shot, then setting up the way I mentioned, having a sternum a little bit more forward. You know, the club face is a variable depending on height.
Right.
So, you know, if you want to hit a little higher or lower, you're either going to adjust the club face or change the club. Like that's fine as well. But if I was just going to go to that second pin, I'm not really going to do anything different with my setup. I'm just going to make a slightly bigger swing, just to change my landing spot. But you'll notice it's still pretty controlled. I'm not going up too high. Generally, the more loft that you have, the more the ball's forward, the more you lean back, it's going to hit the ball higher, so you'll have to start to make a bigger swing. Again, makes sense if you've got to go over that bunker.
Right.
Doesn't make that much sense when you've got no trouble or rough or anything like that to carry in front. So I think we just clean up the setup first and see how that feels. Yeah, we'll keep using this 54. I think that's a good club. So let's get set up to a ball, and just first for the distance. Yep.
That feels very near.
Good. And I'd also say, like with your stance line, firstly just square it off completely. So make your feet dead square too. Yep.
Okay.
And if you want to do anything with your feet, just flare the left foot a little bit, but you don't have to like spin your hips open. Yeah. In other words, I would say getting a little bit more this way, just kind of leaning into it a little bit without twisting your hips open, is really all you need to do. Yeah. Does that feel quite different, that setup?
Yeah, my old one feels much more open.
Okay, when the ball lands, given especially this situation where it's pretty flat, you want to have the ball kind of release out to the hole. Sometimes you might want it to stop, I'm not saying,
Yeah.
but do you need it in this situation? I'd call this pretty much the most vanilla, basic type of shot you're going to find.
Yeah.
So in your case, what I would say, you're adding like a few too many flavors to the, you know, to the basic shot.
Right.
Do you need to do it again when it's this simple? I'd say it's not that necessary. If I pulled you straight over to the side of the bunker there and we had that little ridge to come up,
Yep.
then I'd say open the face a little bit, move the ball forward, because now you just need to add, you know, a couple of changes to get the ball to kind of land a little bit softer.
Right.
So I think that's like a good way to think about it. Always have a baseline to work off. I'd say this is a pretty good baseline. And then you can, you know, adjust to that baseline given the situation, higher, lower, you know, changing clubs, that sort of thing. Yeah. But let's just have a quick run through here. So that's your setup after we made the changes.
Oh, still very much to the left, the leaning part.
Yeah. So I'd say ball's pretty much dead in the center. It's always a bit tricky sometimes looking at the ball position when you have your stance really open, as in like it can get skewed a little bit. That's why I always like to have the right foot really square.
All right.
And then you can just turn the left foot open like you've got there. But what I would say here as well is the sternum, we'll just say about there. I mean, it's just falling very, very slightly in front of the ball. So that's going to definitely take loft off the club. Okay. No doubt. Can't see it from here, but you're obviously a lot closer to the ball. Yep. And I said, I feel like you use the club pretty well. I mean, generally for these short shots, we're trying to keep the club, let's just say about, below the level of the waist.
Yeah.
Back and through. We're not trying to elevate it too much. Impact's fine. And there's your finish. So I think it's a good little action. As I said, with a setup that's a little bit skewed or a little bit not as functional for the maybe shot that I'd like to see you hitting. Right. So we'll hit a few more. Really nice. So there's your setup. Yep. You're about, said that foot's width away. Yep. And as I said before, you use the club great. I mean, it goes back, no twisting of the handle there. I mean, club's like nicely in front. I mean, as long as you're rotating that chest through, club's going to fall into the back of the ball. But I'd say there's very little chance to hit behind it there because of where your upper body is and where your ball position is. And if we look at say, one of these ones, this is actually a miss hit. You can definitely see you're further from the ball. Yeah. As far as that foot's width that I mentioned, right. Which lowers the handle, which sometimes brings the heel strike into play. You get that with your full swing sometimes. Yeah. So when you stand closer, you'll get more upright, which means the toe of the golf club or the heel of the golf club's a little bit more off the ground. Okay. But again, it looks pretty similar here going back. Yep. But the club hits the ground right about here. Yeah. And there's kind of like your duff. Yep. So the good thing is it's not swing path related. It's not kind of how you're moving related. It's primarily just your setup. Yeah.